I don't remember another time when the city was so on edge.
That was really a huge break and a key to connecting the rape cases to the murder cases.
All of these things were connected. So we're back, episode number 3. How you been, Ryan?
Good. How about you?
Things, you staying busy?
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of things going on here at the office, and now it's week 3 of our podcast.
Yep.
We're going to take a little bit of a darker turn this week into some very kind of ugly, sort of sinister facts. And if anybody was living here in the fall of 2005 into basically the summer of 2006, you know that it was a scary time. I grew up in Arizona, and I don't remember when another time when the city was so on edge. You remember that?
Yeah, it's easy to forget. Right. It's easy to just kind of move past and say, yeah, we live in a good community. That was a time, and I was living here in Arizona at the time, that it's like you hear about in the movies, right? Where people were scared to go out walking and do different things. We're going to talk about one of the cases today. Well, really, it's 2 cases, but it's the same offender. But this isn't the only one at the same time.
That's right. Yeah. So, and what we're talking about is the baseline killer. Okay, Mark Goudeau was the eventual suspect, the eventual defendant, and was ultimately convicted of a number of heinous acts that took place in the valley from essentially August of 2005 into the spring and summer of 2006. And at the same time, and this is what was wild, at the same time, you had Dale Hausner and Sam Dietman, who were later charged and convicted with the serial shooters, which is a different set of crimes. These guys were rolling around randomly shooting animals and people and committing acts of violence, but different than the baseline killer. And so what we're going to focus on today is Mark Goudeau and the baseline killer investigation. And because this is such a lengthy and complex case or cases, there's actually 2 court cases that happened as a result of these offenses, 2 cases. We're going to do this in 2 parts. We're going to focus today solely on the facts of each of the 2 cases. And then in our next episode, we'll talk about the trial, because the trials were complex with some complicated legal issues.
Yeah, it's vast, right? It covers a lot of offenses, dates, victims, and so there's a lot to get through.
Yeah, and so, with these cases are interesting. Mark Goudeau's case is interesting because, as you said, the valley, what we call the valley, is really the Phoenix metro area. You have sort of the heart of it is the city of Phoenix, and then the surrounding areas, Tempe, Scottsdale, Glendale, and all of those cities form what we call the valley, okay? And back in 2005, in August of 2005, there starts to be a series of robberies and sexual assaults, rapes, and murders. And it took police a little while to string these together to realize that, hey, maybe this is the work of a single actor. And as that developed, again, the city is now becoming on edge because there's this guy who is out kind of working in the South Phoenix, Central Phoenix area, committing some pretty heinous offenses.
Right. And so what we saw, and this happens, is that as time passed and it really started to build up this fear in the community, is what always happens next is that pressure really started to build on specifically the Phoenix Police Department.
Yeah, and all of these crimes were committed in the Phoenix metro area, really within the city of Phoenix, although some did move a little bit further east towards Tempe, okay? And so what I want to do is, as we've talked about, we really want to focus on what were the facts that were presented in trial. Now, this was a very, not sensationalized, but publicized crime spree, made national headlines and had people on edge. But we want to focus on what was it that was presented at trial? And so this is going to be kind of complex. What we want to do is just break down each event, talk about each series of acts, and develop that story a little bit so our listeners can understand exactly what it was that Mark Goudreau was charged with doing, okay? So the first of these offenses was August 6, 2005, and I'll read from the trial transcript. In the evening of August 6, 2005, armed with a silver handgun, and that handgun is going to be important because the bullets that were used in that handgun were eventually linked to the same offenses, or this series of offenses. Armed with a silver handgun, Goudreau approached Jenny S., Sarah U., and Jesus F., all minors at the time. These are some teenagers, and told them he had just robbed a bank, needed directions, and waited for his buddy to give him a ride. At gunpoint, Goudreau ordered them to go to the dark, secluded area behind the church, where he sexually assaulted Jenny and Sarah and wiped them off with a towel before leaving the scene. So he sexually assaults two teenagers, and this was at, kind of South 48th Street, 7202 South 48th Street. So that's offense number one. About a month later, September 8th, 2005, Georgia Thompson was found dead with a gunshot wound to her head in her apartment parking lot. A neighbor testified that she heard a woman scream, quote, "Leave me alone," followed by a gunshot, and another neighbor testified that he had also heard a woman scream that night. This one is 3730 South Mill Avenue in Tempe, okay?
Right, and it's just important to note, so this one, she was 19, Georgia was 19 years old, I think you said that. That she was the first murder victim of Mark Goudreau.
Right, and then so a couple of weeks later now, September 20th.
Well, sorry to interrupt too.
Go ahead.
We started to see what later became a pattern as well, where she was shot in the head, and she was found with her pants unzipped. And I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but almost staged to see if as if there was a sexual assault, but they didn't indicate that there was actually a sexual assault in that case.
Right, and so some of the common threads that you're going to see through these facts, and it's grisly. Nobody enjoys talking about these things, and we hate putting this out there, but it's the truth of what happened. He was a very violent and then sexually motivated, really predator. Okay, and that's how the prosecutor Suzanne Cohen, who ultimately tried these cases, that's how she framed him. That's how you talked a couple of episodes ago about a theme. That was one of her themes in trial. So fast forward to September 20th, 2005. Now this one was the subject of a separate trial. So in one case, in the larger of the two cases, the prosecution had charged him with 74 counts, massive indictment, okay? September 20th, 2005 was not part of that original trial. This one was a sexual assault that happened again in 2005, but he was arrested and charged separately for this offense. And when we get into episode 2, we'll talk about how the jury heard evidence of both of those cases together. But this is one where the state introduced evidence of Goudreau kidnapping or assaulting two sisters, Lorena L. and Alejandra L. And essentially what he did is kind of cornered both of them, sexually assaulted one, sexually abused another, and they were let go. They were not killed. And in that case, he was charged with those sexual offenses separately from the murders. Okay.
And is that the one that ended up having DNA?
Yes.
That was, because it was kind of a unique set of circumstances too. And I don't know if we're going to dig into that. I'm sure we will. But I think he had tried to learn about DNA or knew about DNA is the speculation, and that he had, correct me if I'm wrong, he had them spit into his hands and rub dirt and mud onto their bodies to try to destroy the DNA.
That's right. And so I guess to dig in a little bit more of these facts on that event, this is at 3100 West Vineyard. And so that is in that kind of Baseline corridor area, 31st Avenue, south of Baseline. Two sisters, he was walking behind them. He crossed over the road to get behind them. He was walking faster, ultimately pulls out a gun. He tells them, "Don't look at me," tells them to be quiet, has them take off their clothes, sexually assaults them. And then, it has one of them kind of rub their bodies with, this mud and other things to try to probably cover up the DNA. But ultimately, that is the one that police were able to first connect him via DNA and arrest him. And then as they continued their investigation now with Godot in custody, they executed search warrants and did other things to connect these crimes back to him.
Right.
So that September 20th, 05 is a really key portion of this case because it ultimately is the one that kind of got the ball rolling for his arrest.
Which is interesting because it was so early in the process.
Early on. This is really his third, incident. And so, but he continues. Now, he's kind of getting a little bit more brazen because 8 days later, September 8th, at 1425 West Baseline, now this is closer sort of the Tempe side of Baseline, 3 people were working at the takeout window of a restaurant. Melissa C., Iselda H., and Martha H. were working at the takeout window of a restaurant when Godot pointed a gun at them and demanded money. They fled, and he grabbed one of their purses. And then he approaches Margie M. and her 12-year-old daughter, Bianca M. They're sitting in their car parked near the takeout window. He points a gun at Margie, gets into the passenger seat, orders her daughter not to look at him, demanded that Margie start driving. During the drive, he talked frequently, instructing them not to look at him, saying that his buddy had left him behind, similar to what he had said in another incident. At some point during the drive, he demanded $20 from Margie and sexually assaulted Bianca. Bianca's 12 years old. Sexually assaults Bianca. Eventually, Godot directed Margie to pull over behind a store where he ordered her and Bianca to get undressed. He goes to the back area where he first entered the car, demanded more money. She gave him a coin purse. He used the victim's clothing to wipe down areas of the car he had touched, and he left Melissa C., the drive-through attendant's purse inside the car. So really 5 victims. The 3 folks who were at the drive-through and then this mother and her daughter in their car. No murders at that point, but sexual assault and robbery. Okay. And again, he tries to cover up the DNA by wiping things down. He knows or thinks that, police may be on to him. All right, next one, November 3rd, 2005. This is at 4019 North 32nd Street in Phoenix, a little bit further north, but still kind of in that same general area. Godot enters a store where Teresa G. worked as a clerk, pointed a silver handgun. Again, we're seeing the same silver handgun at her head, demands money, left the store after she gave him money from the cash register. Shortly thereafter, he approaches Amy P. in a parking lot where Teresa G. worked, pointed a silver handgun at her, demanded that she give him a ride. He sat in the front passenger seat and ordered Amy to drive up and down various streets. He told her that he had just robbed a store and his buddy had left him behind. Same story, right? He then ordered her to pull over to a quiet neighborhood where he demanded that she undress. He sexually assaults her and then orders her to spit on her hand and rub it on areas of her body that he had touched. And then he told her to drive back to the store and he takes cash in her purse before he leaves. So again, violent robberies, using a gun, committing acts of sexual assault, all kind of in this localized South Phoenix portion of the valley.
And probably not all that important, but I think it's just interesting too. I mean, at this point, I don't know at what point he kind of gets dubbed the baseline rapist, right? Because I don't think they necessarily connected the murder to that same set of acts at that time. And that he did a murder and then just goes back to other armed robberies and assaults. And it's an interesting kind of development of his acts.
I think one of the state's theories about how he operated was that the folks that put up any resistance got killed. Those that didn't, who just kind of went along with his demands, they lived. But if you fought against him, at least that's a theory, is that if, those that didn't go along with it got killed. Okay. So he's not afraid, clearly, to use the most serious form of violence there is, which is shooting people, killing people. Okay, just 4 days later, November 7th, 2005, and you can kind of see this momentum building. I mean,
it's so
just one after another.
Yeah, so many, so fast. Yeah.
2950 North 32nd Street. Alfredo L. was standing in his restaurant with 2 employees, Marisol L. and Iris H. When Godot entered, brandished a silver handgun, and demanded money. Marisol and Iris fled out of the back of the restaurant while Alfredo gave Godot money from the cash register. Godot demanded and took a wallet from Mauricio O., a customer standing by the cash register. After he leaves, Alfredo went outside and saw Godot enter an adjacent restaurant. So he's committing another robbery. At the second restaurant, pointed a silver gun at Maria L. and Jesus L., who were working the cash register, and demanded money. Jesus complied. After leaving the second restaurant, Godot approached Cheryl M., her mother, and her 2 young children who were just getting out of the nearby car. Godot pointed his handgun at Cheryl and her mother and attempted to grab her mother's purse. After Cheryl told him they did not have any money, Godot fired a round in the air and ran off without the purse. As he did so, Mauricio and Pedro from the first restaurant chased Godot and stopped when he shot at them.
I mean, again, so brazen, right? Armed robbery, armed robbery, armed robbery, all at the same time in a restaurant, a building, a person out in a parking lot. It's unusual.
And what I said earlier about any form of resistance, what happens? Gun comes out, gun goes off, right? He shoots twice in that incident, doesn't kill anybody, doesn't hurt anybody, but he's willing to use that gun when he doesn't get what he wants. Okay. December 12th, 2005, 6005 North 40th Street. Again, same part of town. On December 12th, 2005, Peter O. was preparing to leave work when he heard a couple of bangs coming from an alley behind his building. When he stepped into the alley, he saw Godot holding a silver gun pointed at the body on the ground. Godot pointed the gun at Peter, who heard a click. Peter rushed back into the building, locked the door. The body was identified as Tina Washington, who had been fatally shot in the head. Jewelry that Washington had been wearing earlier was absent from the scene. It's a really interesting one, okay? You know, we talked earlier about the sexual assault of the 2 sisters that led to his arrest based on DNA. This Washington murder of Tina Washington, it's important for 2 things. First, this jewelry was a very particular gold ring that she had. It was very unique. That gold ring later comes up in a search warrant after Godot's arrested. Phoenix police do multiple search warrants on his house, 3 total search warrants on his house. But they find that ring in his closet in a shoe that belonged to Miss Washington. Okay, and so that's critical. How else does it get there? That's the argument: is how on earth does that get there unless Godot put it there?
Right, and his family, including Godot, have argued that. And again, that's a little bit of a saying it wasn't until the 3rd search warrant that they found it, a month after he'd been arrested. How could they have not seen it in the shoe that was apparently already poking out, from a rack of shoes?
Right.
So it's interesting.
Well, he did have supporters, and we can pause here for a second. His wife adamantly supports him and says, Phoenix police frame Mark Godot. They planted the evidence of the ring. They lied about DNA evidence. They mischaracterized the DNA evidence. Their DNA statistics are not nearly as good as they claim them to be. Wife is defending him to the end. Okay? And, that's not necessarily surprising. Many people have strong supporters, and including Godot, who says, he maintains, I'm innocent, you got the wrong guy. Never once confessed to anything, never once admits to doing anything, and he's got a strong supporter in his wife.
Right, and that's interesting too. I mean, I'd be interested to know the numbers on how many serial killers. I mean, he is a convicted serial killer.
Right.
Continue to just wholly deny their guilt. So
yeah. Now, focusing on this Tina Washington murder as well, there was an unfired bullet that ejected from his pistol, or at least was left at the scene. And that's important because it was misfired in the gun. And, firearms experts will tell you that guns and firearms leave certain tool marks on the rounds and the casings. And this one had a particular, pattern or formation on that casing, that unfired round, that police then collected, and they were able to then match that bullet to the casings at other murders, saying that, that same gun was used. So important forensic evidence that police gathered from this Tina Washington murder: the bullet, the ring.
And he continued to do things that were so pattern-like, right? That I guess by his own behavior, his own words, linked them to prior acts, right? The way that he killed them, the things that he said to them are things that were repeated throughout different victims.
Yeah, the idea of, my buddy, we just robbed a place and my buddy, I don't understand why you would tell somebody that we just robbed a place. But in any event, we just robbed a place and my buddy left me behind, right?
Really knocks down the walls, right? People
So, yeah,
aren't that
okay.
scared of you. Oh, I'll help you out.
That's right. Oh, you just
you
got left
Let
behind?
me help you.
Anyway, he does use that, right? And then, the pattern of sort of covering up or wiping down areas that may have DNA and other things. So, that was December 12th, Tina Washington, and then he kind of skips over the holidays. Maybe he takes a little bit of a Christmas break or a New Year's break, because the next crime that is linked to him is February 20th, 2006. So a couple months later, Romelia Vargas and Myrna Roman were found dead side by side on the floor of Vargas's food truck, each with a gunshot wound to the head. Police did not find Vargas's purse or driver's license at the scene. This was way out west. This was 9100 West Lower Buckeye. So Lower Buckeye is below baseline heading south. But 9100 is pretty far west. You're kind of into that Tolleson area of Phoenix. And so this one really was not linked as a baseline murder initially. Ultimately, it was. But at first, this was thought to just be a random murder, not connected, but eventually it was connected.
Yeah, I mean, this one, they're all tragic, okay? But this one, it seems like specifically had a lot of kind of emotional tie to family that was there in the court and the testimony. Basically, these were two women who were running this snack truck to support their families. Romelia had, 6 children, including a 5-month-old twins at the time of her death. One of the twins, Anthony, has Down syndrome. It was just tragic, and the two of them were making it work, for their families with this truck, discovered by workers who really depended on this truck and really kind of had a regular following.
Yeah.
And they didn't open.
At the time, there was some new home construction heading out, getting done in that area, and this food truck kind of serviced those workers in that construction zone and things. And yeah, just, two probably very good women, raising families, working hard, gunned down by Mark Goudreau, probably for a purse, money. Okay, so moving into March 14th, about a month later, 4102 North 24th Street. That's at about Indian School on 24th Street. This is one of the only male murder, okay? Chow Cho and Liliana Sanchez left work together in Cho's car. Sanchez's body was later found in the front passenger seat, partially unclothed, with a fatal gunshot wound to the head. Chow's body was found in an alley a few blocks away, also with a gunshot wound to his head. Ballistic evidence indicated that both victims had been shot inside the car, with the shooter seated in the rear passenger seat. Cho's keys were missing, and neither victim had any cash in their wallets. So this was at a Yoshi's restaurant. If you remember that, I don't think there's any more Yoshis around, but kind of a rice bowl type place. Both of these people were employees at that restaurant, male, female, and both killed in that vehicle and robbed. Again, Chow Cho was the only male that was killed by Mark Goudreau.
And I think that the conclusion, and I think the way it was brought out at trial too, is he was just in the way, right? It was just, he was in wrong place, wrong time. He was not the target. The MO for Goudreau was female victims, and that's what he was after, and Chow was in the way.
So then we move forward about 2 weeks later, March 29th, 2006, 2502 North 24th Street. Business owner arriving at work noticed a parallel track of drag marks and several blood spots running from a parking lot at the front of his shop to a storage shed in the back. Police took samples of the blood but did not locate a body. 5 days later, overwhelmed by a stench emanating from the storage shed area, the business owner moved debris and uncovered what appeared to be human body parts. Police moved additional debris and discovered Kristen Gibbons' mostly nude and severely decomposed body with a gunshot wound to the head. She had bruising and scratching on her arms and legs, and a purse and a cell phone were missing. Just awful.
Yeah.
Awful murder. Not entirely sure when it was committed, probably a couple weeks prior to that. I don't know how long it took for that body to get in its condition that it was in, but...
And you know these better than me as far as the details of this. Is this the only one that wasn't kind of immediately found, the body?
Yeah, because he
didn't really go to lengths to hide them otherwise, right?
Right. All of the other murders were reported, essentially when they occurred, because you had, like, in one instance, there was somebody who overheard screaming. Another instance, it's kind of more public. This one, it's a little more covered up because nobody was around when it happened and it wasn't really discovered. And then the body, was kind of hidden. Mm-hmm. So maybe more attempts by Godot to cover his tracks. So a few days later, April 10th, 2006, Sofia Nunez's 8-year-old son came home from school and found his mother lying submerged in a bathtub inside the house.
Ugh, and this one's just gets you too. I mean, they talk about that he testified in trial. He was the youngest witness. I can't remember how old he was at the time when he testified, maybe 12 or something like that.
Well, he would have been, if he was 8 years old in 2006, the trial actually happened, I think, in 2011 or right around there. So, he's maybe 12, 13, something like that.
Yeah, and talks about how she didn't pick him up from school like she normally did. So he walked home, gets home, all the doors are locked except the garage door. He goes in, and he hears the water on in the bathroom, so he figures mom is taking a shower. After a while, he sees water coming from under the door. Yeah. So he goes into the bathroom and finds his own mother.
But how brazen is this? This is inside somebody's home. All of the other ones we've seen were much more public, right? They're in cars, they're in drive-thrus, they're in stores, they're out in the public sphere where people are kind of, roaming around or doing their job or driving or getting into their car, that type of thing, walking home. This one is inside the person's own home, which gives an indication that he was somehow tailing her, stalking her, something to try to figure out what her routine was, and then goes inside and murders her.
Well, and I don't know, we're probably going to get into this later. My understanding was that this young man also helped tie Mark Godot from the rapes to the murders, because he was seeing the trial and he saw Mark Godot on TV and he said, "That's my mom's friend."
Right.
And so later we find out that somehow Mark Godot knew this victim.
You're right. Yeah, and the boy, had recognized him as somebody he had interacted with.
And that was before. Really a huge break and a key to connecting the rape cases to the murder cases. Yeah.
All right, May 1st, 2006, 2950 North 32nd Street in Phoenix. Godot pressed a silver handgun against Adrienne M's head as she sat in her car and ordered her to open the front passenger door. After entering the car, Godot said he had just robbed a store and needed to meet his friend. So now the friend hadn't left him. He's going to go and find his friend, and repeatedly told Adrienne where to drive and not to look at him. Godot eventually ordered her to pull over in a secluded neighborhood and get undressed. He then ordered her to perform oral sex on him. When she refused, he raised his gun to her head and threatened to shoot her. She replied, "Go ahead." She heard the gun click, grabbed her car keys, and ran from the scene.
Wow.
He's also apparently in that one dressed in a Halloween mask of some kind.
And saying that his whole body is covered?
Yeah.
Something like that.
So taking efforts to try to disguise himself.
Yeah. Although he does them the favor of using the same story.
That story is going to come into play during the trial. Yeah. As well as, of course, the silver handgun, the other forensic evidence that was left behind.
And other things, right? Like the way that he continually tells them not to look at him. There's just consistencies there.
Yeah, and, the prosecution, that becomes one of their key tools, is to say, hey, he's doing it again, and he's got these same patterns. And when identity is the issue, right, then those patterns, that repeated behavior, those signature marks or behaviors, those really come back to bite you.
Yeah, and that's this is the first case that we've done like that, where this is actually a whodunit, right? Where that was the investigation, and then the trial was proving identity. I mean, that's what this trial was, right? So
yeah, that's right. Now, last event, June 29th, 2006. This is at 2924 East Thomas. Carmen Miranda was at a car wash speaking with her boyfriend on her phone when the boyfriend overhears a male's voice demand that Miranda give him something. Surveillance video from the car wash showed her vacuuming her car when her car seats, when Godot approached, pushed her into the rear seat and drove away in her car. So carjacking. Miranda's car was found in a secluded parking lot 2 hours later. She was lying dead in the back seat with a gunshot wound to her face, pants unzipped and pulled down. She's on the phone with her boyfriend. Godot pushes her in the car, throws her in the backseat, takes off, takes her to a secluded area, sexually assaults, and shoots her.
And my understanding is that the boyfriend obviously knew something was very wrong.
Right.
At the moment, him and some of her family members immediately, they knew where she was. Immediately go there. And it's too late. She's gone.
This is one, though, we talked earlier about that Tina Washington murder and some key pieces of evidence that were found there. In this one, this was actually his last crime that was committed. Again, date is June 29th, 2006. The car wash had some localized video, surveillance video, camera. And Godot was caught on camera. Now, according to Godot's wife, the police sort of manipulated this video. It was very grainy video, hard to make out anything. You know, sometimes people call that Bigfoot video, where you don't really know what's going on, but they claim that there's something. You know, police used this, the prosecution used this video in trial to say this is Mark Godot, but the wife maintains you can't tell anything from this video. But it was important because it was sort of that final piece in the puzzle that linked Godot to these murders. Okay, so how did he get arrested? So let's jump into that. I want to give you his arrest date, September 6th, 2006. So that's a couple of months after this June murder, 3 months about after this June murder. He's arrested not for any of the homicides, but for the sexual assault on those two women back in 2005. Okay, based on some DNA that was recovered from their bodies and processed and eventually linked back to Godot. Now, why is his name in the system? Okay, so to help people understand a little bit about DNA evidence, DNA is used very frequently, almost, in lots of different types of cases. But back in 2005, it was still kind of gaining steam as a method of identification. And Godot had his DNA in the system because of prior arrest. This was not his first rodeo, as they say. So should we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you have the facts on that prior case, but he ended up serving a long period of time in prison, which right. I don't know at that time if even the conviction automatically created a requirement for obtaining the DNA as it does now. Anytime somebody is convicted of a felony in Arizona, it's a requirement that they get their DNA taken.
Yeah, and that statute has been in play for a long time. Godot had prior to these assaults and murders, he had gotten out of prison. He served 13 years in the Department of Corrections, really for a brutal aggravated assault and sexual assault. Gets out and then he's married. He is working in construction. He, according to him, is just, he's living a life of a law-abiding citizen.
And according to neighbors, right? Apparently he's done a pretty good job he's not like a loner, like you hear some of these, right. Serial killers that, everybody always thought something was wrong with this guy, right? Like,
yeah.
He fit in with neighbors. Even those that were aware of his past said, oh yeah, this is a guy who's really turning it around and doing the right thing and had friends and family.
And that was one of his explanations for why it wasn't him. Why would I do this? He says, because life's going good for me. I'm married. I'm working. I'm doing good things. Why would I bother, getting involved in these types of homicides and sexual assaults? I mean, it's an interesting point, and I'm certain he has people who who believed that. Certainly the jury in this case didn't believe it. Police didn't believe it. Prosecutor didn't believe it. And now, Mark Godot stands convicted of those things. I want to talk a little bit about his background, and then I want to touch on also these locations, why those were important, sort of the map of where these things laid out, and then ultimately this composite sketch that was developed because it was helpful in apprehending Mr. Godot. Okay, so he's born in Phoenix, 1964. He's the second youngest of 13 kids. Big family. His parents were Willie, a car dealer lot attendant, and Alberta, a maid, both of whom later divorced. Willie was strict, according to this report. Other siblings say that Willie was verbally abusive and that alcoholism ran in the family. Alberta died in 1976 when Godot was 12. He went to high school at Corona del Sol in Tempe. My wife went to Marcos de Niza in the same school district. She's, younger than Godot, but, he grew up here, had his family here, was raised here. He was apparently pretty good at sports. Didn't ultimately graduate from high school and ended up getting into trouble, arrested and charged. In 1982, he and his brother were arrested for raping a young woman, but no charges were filed. He was charged with trespassing in 1987, DUI the following year. In 1989, he was charged with abducting a woman, brutally raping and bludgeoning her. He claimed that she willingly had sex with him and that the rape and assault was the work of 2 other men. He was sentenced to 15 years for the abduction and 21 years for the robbery. He served 13 years, and he's paroled in 2004.
And that's an interesting one. I did see an interview with the detective who worked that case, and he was actually the first on scene when it happened. So I actually think he was a patrol officer. He was not a detective. Okay. And he talked about how, it's always hard to know because they're looking in retrospect now and saying, oh, I knew this, from the beginning. Right. But talked about how when he arrived on scene, there was this naked woman running out in the parking lot, like not worried about being naked in front of everybody because she thought she was going to die, right? And she tells them what happened, that she was brutally attacked by this person who's still in the apartment. They go to the apartment, and he says that Mark Godot answers the door, calm as could be.
It's like, hey, what's up?
What's going on? Like nothing happened, and just basically gives a different story of, oh, no, she kind of just freaked out and took off. I don't really understand it. And so he looked back on that, and he was actually part of the task force as well.
Of this officer.
Yeah, okay. I think coincidentally, because they had hundreds of officers on this task force.
Right.
And he said when he read through it and it came to Mark Godot as the suspect, he just said, oh my goodness, I know that name, and I'm familiar with it. So,
from back in that incident in 1990.
Yeah.
So Godot does his 13 years. He comes out. He marries his wife, Wendy Carr. Like we said, he's working construction, living his life.
I was confused about something, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't. Is that the victim from that case? I don't want to give false information here, but it seemed to me that she was the victim in that case.
I don't know that.
We'll
come back to that question. Ryan's going to promise to answer it.
I'll bring that
So
up.
A couple of things that are important, and we'll put up a graphic on our, at least on the video portion, the YouTube portion of this. Tough to see here. But, the map, we'll throw this up there, the map of his crimes really are focused in that kind of South Phoenix baseline corridor.
Thus, the name.
Baseline killer, okay? But not all of his crimes were in that area. Another batch of offenses were more kind of in this sort of central Phoenix grouping. Kind of north of the 202 and east of the 51, this sort of pocket of kind of East Phoenix, I suppose, is really where that is at. So, grouped, but not entirely in the same location, right? He kind of moved around a little bit in these kind of 2 major groups. And then the other thing that was really interesting, and if you were living in Arizona at the time, you probably remember this picture. I mean, wasn't this on the news all the time?
Every day. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you compare this photo to Mark Godot, there's certainly a lot of resemblances, right? He never had that long hair. I don't know if that's a wig or something else, but he's always been photographed with a real short haircut. I don't know if that's a wig. I don't know if it's something else. But this thing was splashed on the news all the time.
Every day.
Until he got caught. Now, let's talk about that for just a moment. One of the main talking points that his wife, Wendy Carr, made was that police just needed to make an arrest. What's your take on that?
It's a legitimate argument. I think that this happens sometimes, and it certainly was the case. And there's really no way to avoid it in this type of a situation where you have public panic, right? Deep concern about it. People would talk about if they saw somebody, if they were out, parking a car at night, they'd look around, before unlocking any doors or doing anything, seeing if anybody was around. If they saw somebody in a parking lot it was this fisherman hat or this bucket hat or whatever, people were very concerned about that because they'd seen this, the pictures of, it was the early 2000s. I think people wore those a little more commonly.
Right.
So it was a scary time. And exactly like we talked about, that puts pressure on the police department to say, guys, we've got to stop this. We've got to catch somebody. We've got to catch the right person, of course.
That's right.
But then the temptation is to cut corners, to do things to just calm the public down. And sometimes that can lead to bad work by police officers. In this case, I thought it was interesting. From what I have read, hundreds of police officers assigned to a task force who had a really hard time coordinating and saying, how am I sharing information and understanding each other, which it's almost like by trying so hard you're making it more difficult. And so I think there's something to be said for that there can be problems with it, but at the same time it doesn't necessarily mean that the work that was done was incorrect or that the outcome was wrong.
Well, and it's easy for us to look back in hindsight and say all of these things were connected. But to connect those dots is not easy.
No, I was thinking the exact same thing as we're reading through it and we're like laying out this timeline. Like, they don't know this on the front end.
That's right.
They're looking at that, and this has just all been pieced back together later. It is really hard to do that.
Yeah, and talking about the public pressure. So the mayor at the time was Phil Gordon, and he, along with, the Phoenix Police Department and other city officials, they had done public forums and meetings and really trying to assure the public that everything was being done to put a stop to this and then to get the guy, okay? And it does. It puts a lot of pressure on law enforcement. It puts a lot of pressure on, the county attorney and others to catch him and bring him to justice. And you don't want to get the wrong guy. So you can certainly see, his Godot's wife's argument that they just needed a suspect. He's an African-American guy living in the area. He's got a criminal record. He's out of prison. He's been, charged and dealt with before for sexual assaults and other violent crimes. Why not this guy? And then, Wendy Carr, his wife, is saying, he's innocent, he's innocent. Godot is protesting his innocence. The forensic evidence, the evidence of, behavior and the witness accounts. Now, a number of people did physically identify him at trial. They said that's the guy.
And
they weren't just going off of the photo. But who's to say that wasn't necessarily tainted by what people saw in the news, or that it was done sort of oriented to try to get that particular result?
And that happens. Sure. I mean, certainly we've seen that. Eyewitness testimony, oddly, is some of the most faulty in court. But yeah, we'll get into that, and I'm curious to see what people think as far as when we talk about what evidence the jury saw. Is that proof beyond a reasonable doubt? They certainly found him guilty of all 9 counts, all 9 murders.
Yeah, and this was a long trial. It took months and months. It took years to bring him to trial. The trial was 8 or 9 months, tons of witnesses, charged with 70-something counts, very complex. But that gives you a glimpse of what the baseline killer did. And we can say did because he was convicted, right? He's on death row right now, and we'll get into the trial next week. But again, if you were living back here in the Valley in 05, 06,
it just brings you back. It just brings you back.
And we're coming up now on 20 years. This fall will be 20 years since the baseline killer, began doing his work and then ultimately was arrested. So interesting case. we'll dive into more about the trial in our next episode. But now you understand basically what the facts are, and what those allegations were for the trial coming up.
Absolutely. Looking forward to getting into the trial.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan.
All right. Thanks.